stupid old man. You don't get to rush this.
Some of you might be surprised to see this game on a list like this. I do think that The Last of Us Part 2 is one of the worst games released in 2020, but not for its technical achievement in visuals and animation, nor for the gameplay that was enjoyable, but for the awful writing. Like with many, I saw the original Last of Us as a masterpiece. I love the story and the adventure that Joel and Ellie went on. The gameplay was intense, grounded, and brutal. The ending provided a solid conclusion while also leaving it open-ended for discussions. The original game never needed a sequel. After I experienced the sequel for myself, it didn't take long to see how the writing was built on forced actions, contrived situations, and writing, along with characters acting out of their development to get them into situations to try and make the plot work. This resulted in an experience that felt cheap, insulting, and disrespectful to the original. After I played 2, it was obvious that the original game was a lightning in a bottle situation, and with Naughty Dog having old staff leaving and new staff coming on for Part 2, this new team was not up to the same level of quality that we were used to. Conceptually, there are ideas that I think are really interesting in this game. Putting a new character in a situation like Abby where she kills off a character we love and then the game tries to make us feel for her is highly ambitious. The problem is that the talent with these sort of things comes from the execution, not the idea itself. I felt like the game was manipulating me into liking Abby, especially with the use of petting and befriending dogs, where Ellie would normally kill attacking dogs in her sections. I also want to clarify that I'm not upset that the story didn't go the way I wanted it. I'm upset at the execution of the story that we got. Like I said, I never wanted a sequel, and I felt like this was an unneeded thing. I would be all for another story with a new set of characters outside of Joel and Ellie if that's what they wanted to do. But Joel and Ellie's story was tied up in a nice little bow at the end of the original. If you want a more in-depth look at why I didn't like the writing in The Last of Us Part 2, please check out my other video on how the writers failed Joel and my full review on the game. Something I started doing last year was suggesting alternatives to games that I reviewed that I ended up not liking. So I'm going to do that for each one of the games that I put on this list. My alternative for The Last of Us Part 2 would be Days Gone. Days Gone did not get a fair shake from the game's media when it came out, and this turned out to be one of my favorite PS4 titles. If you have a PS5, it runs at 60 FPS on there. Days Gone features a bleak future with a central message about hope and coming together that feels earned by the end of the game. Deacon is a troubled man and a compelling main character. The game is great whether you are facing off against other survivors or the massive zombie hordes that you will encounter. If you haven't tried this game, I would highly recommend you give it a shot. In the last few years, remakes of old titles have been being made. Many of these range from good to great games. When 13 was announced, I felt like if done well, this remake could help to give this underrated shooter some well-deserved attention. Sadly, 13's remake is one of the laziest games I have played in 2020. The game starts its introduction on the highest level of laziness by having a character simply watch the introduction from the original game. This does not make any sense in the story, and nothing interesting is done with this. This feels like it was done to save on development costs with their new engine. The original game had a captivating comic book art style that really helped to set the original apart from its contemporaries. The engaging art style is completely gutted in the remake, and in its place is a bland art style that doesn't do anything good for the game. Now, some of this could be forgiven if the gameplay was actually good, but like the introduction to the gameplay follows suit with the same level of quality, or lack thereof it. The shooting lacks any impact, and the slick comic book transitions are not presented as well like in the original. This also has to be the dumbest enemy AI that I have encountered. This game is an insult to the original and very lazy. To stay in line with remakes, my alternative recommendations would be to honestly check out any of the other remakes released in 2020. Resident Evil 3 may lack some of the features from the original, but it is at least a very enjoyable and brisk game. Final Fantasy VII Remake respects the characterizations from the original, and it is an absolute delight to play even with some of the dumb writing. And the Mafia 1 Remake is an excellent way to experience the classic story with modern visuals and better gameplay than the original. Godfall feels like a game that needs more QA testing to really get the game right. The game does have many issues. The story does have some decent cutscenes, but the narrative fails to pull you into the world and make you engage with it. You are essentially controlling a character that has been beaten down and then needs to rise up to defeat his main foe. On a basic level, this could make for a simple yet engaging story, but not here. The missions feature the samey type of objectives that you would expect to see from a looter type game, but yet again, they don't do anything interesting with it. That is going to be a common theme with Godfall. On a basic level, there are decent ideas, but the execution just doesn't work. But the most important area that they didn't get right is the gameplay. The act of leveling up and earning new equipment is actually pretty good, but the minute-to-minute gameplay is lackluster. The biggest issue with the combat is how there's a massive amount of input delay and the defensive moves that will not cancel your current attack so that you can properly defend yourself. This sort of delay and such could work maybe if you are on a one-on-one fighting system, but Godfall features you fighting several enemies at once. This game is a beautiful mess and needs a lot of work to really get it to an enjoyable state. The sad thing is that I totally would have gone to bat for this title if the gameplay was at least good. If this was a situation where the story was uninspired and the level design was repetitive, but the progression was paired with good gameplay, then this would have been a flawed yet fun title. But that isn't the case here. Godfall is not worth your time. My alternative recommendation for a game like Godfall would be to check out either of the two Division titles. Both of these games provide hours of excellent minute-to-minute gameplay, great progression, and loads of PvE content to enjoy. I love both the Division games and I would highly recommend them.
No.
Movie tie-in games used to get a bad reputation for being lazy cash grabs. Fast and Furious Crossroads is a great example of this, along with providing the same level of bad quality. The first mission actually starts off on the right foot. This brief first level has some fun thrown at the player and kinda has a burnout feel to it. This all pretty much goes away after this level. I feel like this game was advertised as being able to play as some of the characters from the films, but the game is a bait and switch. You spend most of your time with two new characters who do not have any of the charisma or fun from the movies. For the most part, the stars of Fast and Furious are pushed to the sidelines in this. Now, I would be open to this if the new characters were any good, but sadly they are not, and they're honestly annoying. The line delivery from the original cast is horrible. It feels like they were just doing this for a paycheck rather than being engaged in their work. A good example is how Roman is a high-energy nut job in the films, but in the games, he acts like he is on Xanax the entire time. Also, for a game that is based around driving, you would hope that the driving would actually be good. The cars feel loose, and you find yourself fighting the game to try and drive properly. This game is not worth your time. If you are looking for a good racing game, then I would recommend you check out Onrush. This underrated title was released a few years ago and it largely went unnoticed. It is made by former Evolution Studios developers and it's quite fun. I'm all for developers trying to combine two different genres into one. Sometimes the execution is not the best, but as long as there's enough good fun there, then it is worth playing. Sadly, that isn't the case with Disintegration. This game combined first-person shooting with troop control, and when it comes to the gameplay, controlling your grab cycle is clunky. It is a situation where the controls feel too loose, and you will find yourself getting easily hung up on the environment. The shooting is serviceable, but could have been a lot better, as the sensitivity was never right. The campaign has points early on with difficulty spikes, along with a bad checkpoint system. I would have been able to deal with this if controlling your ship was better, but all of this creates a frustrating experience. There's a hub area where you can talk to your teammates, but this area is way too empty to the point that it feels unfinished. The game tries to tell a story, but it has a huge fatal flaw. Since most of the characters are robots and their faces do not move, there's no way for them to emote throughout the story. This creates a disconnect between you and the characters. These character designs could have worked, but their eyes needed to be more expressive. The main conflict and world is poorly set up as well. All of this resulted in me not caring about the narrative. There is something here, but it needed more time to iron it out. If you are looking for a hybrid genre game, then I would recommend the indie Sentinels. This is a tower defense game that allows you to take control of the different towers and play it like a first-person shooter. This has been done before, but these developers do a good job here, and it's a fun, smaller game. When I first saw the trailer, it didn't give off the strongest impression, but I did like that there was going to be split-screen co-op. After playing it, this G.I. Joe game ended up being another lazy use of the license. This is another example of fighting the controls to try and aim properly. I played with the settings, but I can never get the aiming right for the game. It creates a frustrating experience where you feel imprecise because the game was not developed correctly. The enemies are really boring to fight. There's little in the form of variety, and they spend most of the time just rushing your position. The guns lack proper impact and sound weak. weak. It feels like I'm using toys. There are plenty of boss fights and they suffer from the same problems. They are not interesting to fight, and the only difference from the normal enemies are their large health bars. The cutscenes within the game looked and felt very cheap. I understand that they were going for a comic book style, but this needed better execution, especially for a game that sold for $40 to $50. I have seen better cutscenes in smaller indie projects. Like I said in my original review, if you're looking for an awesome co-op shooter, then check out Doorkicker's Action Squad. It is a side-scrolling shooter with offline and online co-op and has a great soundtrack. So that is my list for the worst games of 2020. What are some of the games that you did not enjoy? And thank you very much for watching.